They called us siblings. Then hunted our children, lived the stars were always beautiful to look at, but for Captain Alina Harper, the view from the bridge of the Sovereign felt different now. It wasn't just the vast expanse of black, dotted with distant pinpricks of light. It was the weight of everything that had come to pass, everything that was yet to come. The stars now represented hope, unity, and the shared promise between humans and the Zelgar, a promise of peace, cooperation, and a future where the mistakes of the past would not be repeated. 2 years had passed since the first human exploration ship arrived in Zelgar space, crash landing on a world unknown to them. The first contact had been a disaster. No one could have predicted that such a peaceful-looking alien race could have the firepower to bring a ship down in mere minutes. The misunderstanding had sparked a brief, terrifying war, but it had also opened the door for something none of them had expected, an understanding. Both the Zelgar and humans were young in their spacefaring days, having only recently advanced to interstellar travel. But where the Zelgar had been exploring for centuries, humanity was new to the cosmic scene. They were raw, adaptable, and fiercely determined. The Zelgar, for all their wisdom and ancient history, were not as flexible as humans were, and that made them unpredictable allies. When the fighting ended, the Zelgar leaders had invited humanity into their fold, not as subordinates, but as equals. They called each other siblings. It was a word that carried weight, a word that symbolized unity in a galaxy where distrust between species often led to violence. To the rest of the galaxy, it was a sign of an unbreakable bond. To Alina, it felt like a chance to build something lasting. On this particular day, the Sovereign was tasked with the delicate mission of escorting a delegation of Zelgar ambassadors to a neutral world in the Epsilon system. The galaxy had its share of powerful factions, but the Zelgar and humans had grown to respect each other over the past 2 years. What had started with battles and misunderstandings had bloomed into a true alliance, one forged through shared experiences and mutual sacrifice. Alina stood at the bridge, eyes fixed on the glowing nebula ahead. The Sovereign was a warship, one that had seen its fair share of conflict, but today it felt like something different. The Human-Zelgar alliance was no longer just an agreement. It was a family, a collection of beings who had stood side by side through fire and blood. There was hope in that. Hope that maybe, just maybe, peace could endure in a galaxy that was often at war with itself. The door to the bridge opened behind her, and Cathar stepped in. He was tall, even by Zelgar standards, with his elongated body and shimmering, scaled skin. His eyes glowed a soft violet, a sign of his race's natural ability to perceive the unseen currents of the universe. Where humans saw only stars, Cathar could see the gravitational waves, the subtle shifts of energy that connected all living things. Alina turned, offering a small nod of acknowledgement. "Ambassadors ready for departure?" she asked, her voice steady but tired. "They are prepared, Captain, though I suspect they will miss your unique brand of hospitality," Cathar replied, his voice deep and resonant like the hum of a distant thunderstorm. Alina smiled slightly. "I'm sure they'll find the food on this world much more to their liking than what I have to offer." "They always do," Cathar said, a hint of amusement in his tone. He moved to stand beside her, looking out at the swirling nebula. "I sometimes wonder what the galaxy would be like if humans and Zelgar had always been allies." Alina considered that for a moment. "I think it would have been a much less interesting place," she said softly. "We're both different, but I think that's what makes this work." Cathar studied her for a moment, his glowing eyes narrowing in thought. "You humans are full of surprises. I can never quite predict what you will do." "That's the beauty of it, isn't it?" Alina said with a shrug. "We don't follow the rules, we make our own." Cathar seemed to ponder this, then nodded. "Yes, it is a rare quality, one I am learning to appreciate." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of a soft chime from the control panel. Alina turned, stepping forward to activate the comms system. A calm voice came through, announcing their arrival in the Epsilon system. "We're approaching the rendezvous point," she said, turning back to Cathar. "Ready? As ready as I can be," he replied, his tone serious now. With a final glance at the nebula outside, Alina gave the command to move forward. The Sovereign began its slow approach toward the neutral world where the delegation would meet. The galaxy, as always, was vast and full of possibilities. But in this moment, Alina allowed herself to believe in something more. She believed that the alliance between humans and Zelgar could be a new beginning, not just for them, but for the galaxy as a whole. But like all things in this universe, peace was fragile. They were about to learn just how fragile it was. The Sovereign glided through the vast emptiness of space, the stars twinkling like distant diamonds. Elena Harper stood at the bridge once again, her eyes scanning the endless blackness ahead. Her thoughts were still heavy, but they had shifted slightly. Today's mission felt less like a simple diplomatic task and more like the start of something important, something that could define the future of humanity and the Zelgar. She could feel the tension building in her chest, the uncertainty of what lay ahead, but she pushed it aside. The stars had always been a symbol of hope, even in the darkest times. Beside her, Cathar stood tall and silent. He had not said much since their conversation earlier, and Alina could sense the unease in his posture. She knew him well enough by now to understand that this mission was just as important to him as it was to her. The Zelgar had been through their own struggles, and they had much to lose if their alliance with humanity was ever broken. Alina glanced over at him, studying his face, the sharp angles of his features softened only by the faint violet glow of his eyes. "It'll be fine, Cathar," she said, her voice calm but firm. "We've been through worse. The ambassadors will be fine and we'll get this done." Cathar didn't respond immediately, but when he did, his voice was low and serious. "I hope you are right, Captain. The galaxy is changing. I can feel it." Alina turned fully to face him, her eyes narrowing slightly. "What do you mean? What do you feel?" "I feel a disturbance," he said, his voice trailing off as he looked out at the stars. "A shift in the currents of the universe. Something is coming, something dark." Alina frowned. She had known Cathar long enough to understand that when he spoke of currents and shifts, he wasn't talking about vague sensations. The Zelgar had an uncanny ability to perceive things beyond the normal scope of human senses, an ability that often made them seem otherworldly. Still, the idea of something ominous approaching, something that could threaten the fragile peace between humans and the Zelgar, was not a thought she wanted to entertain. "Whatever it is, we'll handle it," Alina said, trying to reassure both him and herself. "We've got an alliance now. We have each other's backs." Cathar nodded slowly, but he didn't seem convinced. Alina turned back to the controls as the Sovereign drew closer to the designated meeting point. She could see the outline of the neutral planet ahead, a peaceful, unassuming world that had long served as a haven for intergalactic negotiations. It was calm, serene, almost idyllic in its beauty. Alina couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to take a turn. Her instincts had never been wrong before, but she hoped, for once, they would be. "We're nearing the rendezvous coordinates," came the voice of Lieutenant Juno from the comms. Alina nodded, her hand hovering over the command console. She took a deep breath and spoke with confidence. "Bring us in, Juno. Let's make this smooth." The ship began its descent toward the planet's surface, the vast expanse of space shrinking as the Sovereign entered the planet's atmosphere. The stars faded, replaced by the sight of lush green forests, vast oceans, and tall mountain ranges. A perfect world for peace talks. The fact that it was also neutral ground made it an ideal setting for this kind of meeting. It was an environment that suggested calm and cooperation, a place where the stakes could be high without the atmosphere of tension that might accompany meetings on other worlds. As they descended further, Alina noticed something strange. There were ships in orbit around the planet, but they weren't the familiar designs of Zelgar or human vessels. Instead, they were sleek, dark ships, ships that seemed to blend with the shadows of space. Alina's eyes narrowed. She had seen these ships before, on the outskirts of the galaxy, just beyond the range of any known patrols. The Vector. The Vector were a race of aggressive, ruthless aliens known for their brutal tactics and their disdain for anyone they deemed weak. They had been a constant threat to both humans and Zelgar, although no full-scale conflict had ever broken out. They had always been in the background, a silent menace lurking at the edge of every diplomatic gathering. But now, seeing their ships here in the heart of a peace mission filled Alina with a sense of dread. She quickly turned to Cathar, whose eyes were already fixed on the dark vessels. "This wasn't supposed to happen," Cathar muttered, his voice tight. "The Vector should not be here." "What do they want?" Alina asked, her voice sharp. "They want control," Cathar replied, "control of the galaxy, and they will stop at nothing to get it." Before Alina could respond, a loud chime filled the bridge, followed by the voice of Lieutenant Juno again. Captain, we're receiving a transmission from the Vector ships. They demand to speak with you immediately. Alina's heart raced. She exchanged a glance with Cathar. They both knew this was not a good sign. Put it through, Alina said, her tone firm despite the rising tension. A hologram flickered into view in front of them. The image was of a tall, thin alien with smooth, dark skin and piercing eyes. His face was almost featureless, save for a series of jagged markings that ran down the side of his face. He was dressed in dark robes, his appearance cold and calculating. Captain Alina Harper, the Vector envoy said in a voice that sent a chill down her spine. I am Ambassador Racker. I am sure you are aware of the presence of my fleet in orbit. I am, Alina said, her voice steady despite the unease flooding her chest. What do you want, Racker? Racker smiled, though there was no warmth in it. What we want, Captain, is simple. The Vector demand that you cease your alliance with the Zelgar. We will no longer tolerate the existence of such an unnatural bond. Alina's eyes widened. This wasn't just a diplomatic negotiation. The Vector were making an open threat. She felt Cathar tense beside her, his body language betraying his own shock. You can't force us to end our alliance, Alina said, her voice firm, but she could feel the weight of the words as they left her mouth. The Vector were powerful, too powerful for any single race to oppose without risking devastation. We can and we will, Racker replied, his smile widening. If you do not comply, we will be forced to take action. You will not be allowed to continue your existence as a threat to the galaxy. The transmission ended abruptly, the image of Racker disappearing as the comms system fell silent. Alina stood frozen for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. Cathar's eyes glowed faintly in the dim light of the bridge, his expression unreadable. They've crossed the line, Cathar said quietly. Alina turned to him, her jaw set. They're not going to get away with this, we'll fight. But not here, Cathar warned. We cannot risk an open war with the Vector on neutral ground. We must first warn our people. Alina took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. The future of her people, the Zelgar, and perhaps the entire galaxy was at stake. The first strike had been made, and it was clear that the Vector were not here to negotiate. They were here to dominate. We'll warn them, she said, her voice unwavering. And then we'll strike back. The hum of the Sovereign's engines was a familiar sound, a steady rhythm that should have been comforting. But as Alina Harper stood on the bridge, gazing at the dark ships of the Vector in orbit above the peaceful planet below, that rhythm felt more like a warning. She could feel the weight of the decision ahead pressing down on her chest, the pressure mounting with every second. They were no longer in the calm before the storm. The storm had already begun. We've received a message from the Vector fleet, Lieutenant Juno reported, breaking the silence. They've issued an ultimatum. They're demanding that we surrender the Zelgar delegation and abandon all further negotiations. They say it's the only way to prevent a war. Alina's jaw clenched. She glanced at Cathar, who stood silently beside her. His violet eyes flickered with an emotion she couldn't quite place. Was it anger, fear, or something else entirely? The Zelgar, for all their wisdom and strength, didn't show emotion as easily as humans. But Alina knew him well enough to understand that this threat, this demand from the Vector, wasn't something he took lightly. I knew they'd try this, Cathar said quietly, his voice a low rumble. They see us as weak, they always have. Alina turned away from him, her gaze fixed on the vast expanse of space outside the bridge windows. The blackness of space was overwhelming, the stars distant and cold. But the Sovereign was there, cutting through it, a symbol of defiance against the growing darkness. The alliance between humans and Zelgar wasn't just a fragile bond, it was a beacon of hope. If the Vector succeeded in tearing it apart, the entire galaxy would feel the ripple effect. We can't give in to their demands, Alina said firmly. Not now, not ever. Cathar nodded, though his expression remained grim. If we refuse, they will attack, and if we surrender, they will see us as nothing more than tools. The Vector will not stop until they control everything. Alina looked at him, determination hardening in her features. Then we'll fight. The decision was clear, but the path ahead was anything but easy. The Vector were ruthless, their fleets massive and well-equipped. They had no regard for diplomacy, no interest in peace. They wanted control, and they wouldn't stop until they had it. Alina knew that the only way to keep the galaxy from descending into chaos was to strike first. But she also knew that a direct confrontation would come with devastating consequences. We need to warn the Zelgar delegation, Alina said, turning to Juno. Prepare a secure transmission. We need to get word to them before it's too late. A few moments passed before Juno nodded, her fingers moving rapidly over the console in front of her. A soft beep signaled that the message was ready to be sent. Alina watched, her stomach tightening as the transmission went live. "This is Captain Alina Harper of the Sovereign," the message began, her voice clear and authoritative. "We are under threat by the Vector. Their ships are in orbit, and they are demanding the immediate surrender of the Zelger delegation. I advise you to prepare for an emergency evacuation. We will make every effort to ensure your safety, but you must be ready for anything." There was a brief silence after the transmission ended. Alina looked back at the view screen, her heart pounding. The tension on the bridge was thick enough to cut with a knife. She could almost feel the pulse of the galaxy itself, an undercurrent of anxiety and fear. No one knew what would happen next. The fate of the alliance of humanity and the Zelger hung in the balance. "We've lost contact with the Zelger delegation," Juno said, her voice tight with concern. "They're not responding." Alina's eyes widened. "What do you mean, not responding?" "I mean," Juno began, her fingers flying over the console, "they've gone dark. No comms, no signals, we can't reach them." "Damn it," Alina muttered under her breath. She turned to Cathar, her eyes blazing. "They've cut off communication. The Vector must be interfering with their systems." Cathar's gaze was hard, his posture rigid with barely contained rage. "It's worse than that, Captain. The Vector are always prepared for these kinds of tactics. They know how to disrupt communication, how to isolate their enemies. But if they've captured the delegation, if they've already begun their assault..." His voice trailed off, and Alina could hear the unspoken fear in his words. "They wouldn't be that bold," Alina said, though she wasn't entirely sure. The Vector had always operated on the fringes, striking when least expected. The fact that they were so openly defiant now only confirmed their dangerous resolve. "We can't wait any longer," Cathar said, stepping closer to Alina. "We have to act now. If we don't, the Zelger delegation could be lost. The Vector will use them as pawns or worse." Alina nodded, her mind racing. "We need to get down to the surface. We'll launch a rescue operation." "Impossible," Cathar said, his voice sharp. "The Vector will be watching. If we try to land, they'll target us before we can even reach the planet." Alina clenched her fists, her eyes narrowing. She knew he was right. The Vector were nothing if not methodical. They had likely already anticipated every move they might make, but she couldn't just sit here and do nothing. "Then we'll have to outsmart them," Alina said, her voice cold and resolute. The plan was dangerous, reckless even, but it was the only option they had. They couldn't afford to lose the Zelger delegation, not when they had come so far, not when the alliance had meant so much to both races. "We'll need to create a diversion," Alina said, pacing back and forth. "A decoy, something to pull their attention away from the real mission." Cathar's eyes gleamed with a mixture of understanding and approval. A distraction could work. But it must be something they cannot ignore, something personal. Alina stopped in her tracks, turning to look at him. "What do you mean?" "The Zelger," Cathar said, his voice low and thoughtful, "are more than just allies to us. They are family, and the Vector know that. If we were to send a message, not from us, but from the Zelger themselves, it would create confusion. The Vector would be torn between pursuing the delegation or responding to a challenge from within their ranks." Alina's eyes widened as the pieces clicked into place. "You're suggesting we use the Zelger's history with the Vector against them?" "Exactly," Cathar said, his expression hardening. "We will strike at their pride. It's the one thing they cannot ignore." Alina felt the surge of adrenaline flood her veins. This was it. This was their chance. They could turn the Vector's own tactics against them, make them second-guess their every move. "I'll send the message," Alina said, her voice firm with conviction. "We'll make them regret underestimating us." The Sovereign floated in the shadows of the Vector fleet, hidden among the stars like a predator stalking its prey. Captain Alina Harper stood at the bridge, her hands gripping the console as the reality of their situation began to sink in. Time was running out, and the pressure of the mission weighed heavily on her shoulders. The decision had been made. They would use the Zelger's history with the Vector against them. It was a desperate plan, but it was the only one they had. "Status update," Alina said, her voice calm but firm. She didn't want to show her nerves, but the truth was, she wasn't sure what would happen next. They were walking a razor's edge, and the slightest misstep could bring the whole mission crashing down around them. "We've sent the message," Lieutenant Juno reported, her fingers flying over the console. "The Zelgar delegation has received it. They've confirmed the decoy is in place, but we're still not getting any response from the Vector fleet." Alina glanced at the view screen. The dark ships of the Vector hung in orbit above the planet like silent, menacing sentinels. It was impossible to know what they were thinking, but she knew they would never let such a challenge go unanswered. The Vector were a proud race, one that thrived on power and domination. The fact that the Zelgar had dared to strike at their pride was something they could never ignore. Alina only hoped that the distraction would be enough to buy the Zelgar time to escape the Vector's grasp. Cathar stood beside her, his eyes glowing faintly as he studied the incoming data. He was quiet, his face unreadable, but Alina knew that the pressure was hitting him hard too. The Zelgar had much more at stake than humanity did. This wasn't just about survival, it was about the future of their entire race. "Do you think it will work?" Alina asked quietly, her voice a little softer now. Cathar's violet eyes flickered to her. "It must. If the Vector don't take the bait, we lose our chance to rescue the delegation, and if they do, we have to be ready to move quickly." Alina nodded, a cold sense of determination settling over her. There was no turning back now. They would either succeed in pulling the Vector off their course, or they would face the consequences of their defiance. Either way, it was clear that the future of the Alliance was hanging in the balance. The moments stretched into hours as they waited, the tension growing thicker with every passing second. Alina stood at the command console, her eyes fixed on the view screen, watching the Vector ships with a mixture of defiance and apprehension. They had made their move. Now it was up to the Vector to respond. Finally, the silence was broken. The comm system crackled to life with a sharp beep, followed by the voice of Racker, the Vector ambassador. Alina's blood ran cold at the sound. "Captain Alina Harper," Racker's voice was smooth, but there was a dangerous edge to it. "You have made a grave mistake. The Zelgar have defied us once again, and now you will face the consequences." Alina's fingers tightened on the console. "We've done nothing wrong," she said, her voice steady but firm. "You're the ones who attacked us. You're the ones threatening peace in the galaxy. We won't be bullied into submission." Racker laughed softly, the sound carrying through the comms. "You think your defiance is noble, Captain? You think your alliance with the Zelgar will save you? You are nothing but insects to be crushed under our boots. The galaxy will bow to the Vector. All will fall before us." Alina's grip on the console tightened, her heart pounding. The arrogance in Racker's voice made her blood boil, but she knew better than to let her emotions control her. She had to stay focused. "You'll find that we don't bow easily," she said, her voice cold. "The Zelgar and humanity are united, and you won't tear us apart." There was a long pause on the other end of the transmission, and when Racker finally spoke again, his voice was colder, more threatening. "We have no use for your insolence. You will pay for your actions, Captain. The Vector will never be stopped." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Alina staring at the blank screen. She turned to Cathar, whose face was set in a grim expression. "They'll be coming," he said quietly, his voice steady but filled with an underlying tension. "And when they do, they'll come with everything they have." Alina nodded. "Then we'll be ready, prepare for battle." The next few moments felt like an eternity. The Sovereign's crew moved with practiced efficiency, preparing the ship for what was sure to be a brutal confrontation. Alina's mind raced as she reviewed their options, calculating every possible scenario. If the Vector launched a full assault, they would be outmatched in terms of sheer firepower. The Sovereign was a formidable warship, but it was still a human vessel, and the Vector ships were larger, better equipped, and more numerous. But Alina wasn't about to let that stop her. If they couldn't win by strength alone, they would have to outsmart their enemies. She turned to Cathar, her voice low but urgent. "Can we use the Zelgar's technology to level the playing field?" she asked. "Is there anything we can do to give us an advantage?" Cathar's eyes flickered, and for a moment he was deep in thought. Then, slowly, he nodded. "We can modify your weapons systems to incorporate some of our advanced energy shielding. It will give you more defense against their attacks, but it will require time. We don't have much of that." Alina's mind whirred. There wasn't enough time to make all the necessary modifications, but if they could improve their shields, it might buy them some crucial moments. She had no illusions. This was going to be a fight for survival, but she would do whatever it took to protect the Alliance. "We don't need perfection," Alina said, her voice sharp. "Just enough to survive the first wave. Let's do it." The Sovereign's crew worked quickly, patching together what they could. The hum of the engines shifted as the ship adjusted its power systems to accommodate the new shielding. Elena kept her eyes on the view screen, watching as the Vector ships began to move, their sleek dark forms coming into sharper focus. "Here they come," Lieutenant Juno said, her voice tense. "We're not going to get a lot of time before they open fire." Elena took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was about to come. "All hands, prepare for battle, lock onto their lead ship and fire when ready." The moment the words left her mouth, the Sovereign rocked with the force of the first salvo from the Vector fleet. The ship shuddered, but the new shields held, just barely. Elena's eyes flickered to the status monitor, her heart racing as she watched the damage reports come in. "Shields at 60%, Juno reported. "We've taken some hits, but we're holding steady for now." Elena nodded, her mind sharp and focused. "Return fire, target their engines. We need to slow them down." The battle began in earnest, a chaotic blur of flashing lights and the roar of weapons fire. The Sovereign danced through the firestorm, its weapons systems lighting up the darkness as they struck the Vector ships. The enemy was relentless, but Elena could see the first signs of hesitation. Their response was slower than expected, a sign that the decoy message had thrown them off balance. "Keep pressing them," Elena ordered. "We can't let up now." Cathar stood beside her, watching the battle unfold with an intensity that matched her own. "You're doing well, Captain," he said quietly. "But this won't be enough. We need to get to the surface and rescue the delegation. They're our priority now." Elena's grip tightened on the console. "We'll hold them off as long as we can, but you're right, we need to act fast." As the Sovereign continued to fight, Elena knew that the next few hours would determine everything. The Vector were not going to stop, not until they had crushed them completely. But Elena had learned a long time ago that when you had nothing left to lose, you fought with everything you had. And right now, she had a whole alliance depending on her to win. The Sovereign rocked again as another volley from the Vector ships slammed into its shields. The glow from the impact spread across the dark hull of the ship, but the energy shields held barely. Captain Elena Harper stood at the bridge, her face a mask of concentration as the crew scrambled to keep the ship steady. The Sovereign was taking a beating, but it was still in the fight. "Shields at 45%, Lieutenant Juno called out. "We're losing power to auxiliary systems. We can't take much more of this." Elena's pulse quickened. The Vector were relentless. Their ships moved with precision, every shot calculated, every move designed to break their defenses. And yet, despite all the damage they had taken, the Sovereign was still fighting. She couldn't let up now. They had to hold their ground, if not for themselves, then for the future of their alliance. "Increase power to the forward weapons array," Elena ordered, her voice calm but firm. "Target their lead ship. Let's finish this." "We've made contact with the Zelger ships," Cathar said from beside her. He had been quiet for most of the battle, but now his voice carried an edge of urgency. "They're preparing for the rescue mission. They'll be in position shortly." Elena nodded, her eyes narrowing as she focused on the Vector fleet. If they could just hold on a little longer, if they could buy the Zelger the time they needed, they might just pull this off. But every second counted. She turned to Juno, her voice hard. "Tell the fleet to launch all fighters. We need to distract them." "Aye, Captain," Juno responded, quickly relaying the order. Moments later, the Sovereign's hangars opened, and a swarm of human and Zelger fighters shot out into space, weaving through the incoming fire as they engaged the Vector ships. It was a desperate move, one that would put their pilots in direct danger, but it was their only option. "Fighters deployed," Lieutenant Juno called out. "They're drawing some of the enemy's fire, but we can't rely on them for long." "We don't have to," Elena said, her eyes fixed on the battle. "We just need to make sure we don't lose our window." The Sovereign maneuvered through the explosions, dodging debris as it returned fire. The Vector ships were beginning to react more slowly, their coordination faltering as the chaos of battle spread. Elena could see it. Their pride, their overconfidence was beginning to crack. The decoy had worked. Cathar stepped closer, his voice low but urgent. "It's time. We need to make our move." Elena took a deep breath. This was it. This was the moment where everything could change. "All hands brace for evasive maneuvers. Juno, bring us in closer to the surface." Juno gave a quick nod. "Aye, Captain." "We're entering the planet's atmosphere now. This is going to be rough." The ship's engines roared to life, the Sovereign pulling away from the Vector ships as it streaked toward the planet below. The dark ships of the Vector pursued, but their fire was less focused now, scattered by the unpredictable movements of the Sovereign. Alina's fingers gripped the console tighter as the ship descended into the atmosphere, feeling the sharp pull of gravity as they neared the surface. "Initiating shield modulation," Juno called, fingers dancing across the console. "We're taking heavy fire, Captain." "The ship won't hold up much longer." Alina's heart pounded. They had to make it through this or they would lose everything. "We'll make it," she said through gritted teeth. "Keep pushing." The Sovereign streaked toward the surface, the land below growing rapidly in their view. The ground was an alien landscape, forests and mountains, sweeping rivers and valleys that stretched to the horizon. But they didn't have time to admire the view. They were in the middle of a war and their mission was far from over. "Deploying landing gear," Juno said, her voice filled with tension. They were close now, too close. The Vector ships had slowed, but they were still closing in, their guns primed. Alina could feel the heat of the laser blasts from their weapons as they grazed the ship's hull. The Sovereign shuddered violently as the impact sent a tremor through its bones, but they were almost there. "Brace for impact," Juno shouted, her voice rising in panic. Alina barely had time to react as the ship hit the surface, a bone-jarring collision that sent the crew sprawling. The Sovereign skidded along the ground, sparks flying as it scraped across the terrain before coming to a halt in the middle of a dense forest. The ship's systems hummed as they stabilized, but Alina could feel the damage to the hull, the strain on the systems. "We've landed," Juno confirmed, sounding out of breath. "But we're in bad shape. Shields are offline and we've lost most of our weapons." "Get the shuttle ready," Alina said, pushing herself up from the console. "We need to move quickly. These Zelgar are counting on us." Cathar was already at her side, his eyes scanning the environment outside the ship. "I sense them," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "The Vector will be coming. We don't have much time." Alina nodded, her mind racing. "We won't make it back to the Sovereign with all the damage, so we'll need to get to the Zelgar on the ground." The shuttle bay doors opened with a hiss, and the small shuttle that would take them to the surface emerged. Alina and Cathar rushed toward it, their boots thudding on the metal floor of the ship. The moment they stepped inside, the shuttle lifted off, and they were heading toward the Zelgar stronghold. What was supposed to be a peaceful meeting place now turned into the center of a battle for survival. As they flew over the landscape, Alina couldn't help but glance back at the wreckage of the Sovereign. The ship had done its part, its sacrifice had bought them time. But the next steps of the plan would rely on their ability to get in and out without being spotted by the Vector. "We're close," Cathar said, his voice low. "Prepare yourself. This will not be easy." Alina nodded, though her nerves were fraying. They were walking into the heart of enemy territory, and the chances of success were slim. But they had no other choice. If they didn't rescue the Zelgar delegation, everything they had fought for, the fragile alliance between their two species, would be lost. The shuttle touched down in a dense grove of trees, hidden from the Vector's view. Alina and Cathar disembarked quickly, weapons in hand, and began moving toward the base of operations. The air was thick with tension, and every step they took felt like a countdown. The Vector were close, they had to move fast. "Ready?" Cathar asked, his voice as calm as ever. Alina nodded. "Let's go." They moved through the shadows, their feet barely making a sound as they approached the Zelgar stronghold. The planet's native wildlife was eerily silent, and the only sounds that could be heard were the distant echoes of their footsteps and the low hum of the Vector's machinery in the distance. They reached the perimeter of the facility, where the Zelgar were being held. Alina's heart raced as they bypassed the security systems, disabling the alarms with ease. Inside, they found the Zelgar delegation, shaken but alive. The reunion was brief, but the relief in their eyes was enough to make everything they had fought for feel worth it. "We need to leave now," Alina said, her voice urgent. The Vector would be closing in, and time was running out. With the Zelgar in tow, they made their way back to the shuttle. The sound of Vector troops closing in sent adrenaline surging through Alina's veins. They were almost there, but they weren't safe yet. The shuttle took off just as the first Vector forces came into view, their weapons raised. Alina's heart raced, but she didn't look back. They had won, for now. As the shuttle ascended, Alina took one last look at the planet below, at the chaos that had unfolded, and knew that the galaxy had just witnessed something important. the unity between two species that would change everything.